I was 17 years old when my mother first told me I wasn't her daughter. She said it at the dinner table in front of my father, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle. Everyone laughed. It was supposed to be a joke. I laughed too. What else could I do? But I saw the way her eyes stayed cold while her mouth smiled. I saw Uncle Mike stare at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. I felt my father's hand freeze mid-reach for the bread basket. That night I told myself it meant nothing. Families say stupid things. Mothers have bad days. But she said it again and again. Every time I asked for something, every time I needed her. Who knows if you're even mine? 17 years later, I walked into her 40th anniversary party with a DNA test result in my mind, and a truth that would shatter everything she'd built. She was right. I wasn't my father's daughter. But when I revealed whose daughter I actually was, even she wasn't prepared for what came next. Have you ever discovered a truth that explained your entire childhood? My name is Amanda Cross. I'm 35 years old, and I built a financial consulting firm from nothing. 50 employees, a house I bought with cash, and a life I created entirely on my own. None of my family knows any of this. They never asked. I pulled into my parents' driveway on a Saturday afternoon in late September, 3 months after a DNA test had confirmed what my mother had been joking about for 17 years. The house looked exactly the same as it had when I'd left for college at 18, determined to never ask them for anything again. White siding, black shutters, the same rose bushes my father planted when I was 5. Everything familiar, and yet I felt like a stranger approaching someone else's memories. The last time I'd spoken to my mother was 2 years ago. She'd called out of nowhere, her voice syrupy sweet, which meant she wanted something. She asked me to lend Brandon $20,000. He was going through his divorce, she said. He needed help getting back on his feet. I told her I couldn't afford it. I was still building my company, then reinvesting every dollar living in a one-bedroom apartment while my business grew. Her response was instant and cold. I always knew you were selfish, Amanda. You never cared about anyone but yourself. She hung up before I could respond. A month later, I heard from a cousin that my mother had been telling everyone I'd abandoned the family, that I thought I was too good for them, that I'd refused to help my own brother in his time of need. I stopped answering calls from home after that. What was the point? I sat in my car for a full minute before going inside studying the driveway. Brandon's new BMW gleamed in the afternoon sun. Strange, I thought, for someone who supposedly needed $20,000 2 years ago. The front door was unlocked, and I walked into a house full of people celebrating 40 years of my parents' marriage. 40 years of love and loyalty according to my mother. 40 years of lies according to the DNA test I'd taken in June. The living room walls were covered in photographs. I scanned them as I moved through the crowd searching for my own face. Brandon's high school graduation, Brandon's college graduation, Jessica's wedding, Jessica's baby shower, my father's retirement party surrounded by family. I counted 37 framed photos before I stopped. Not a single one showed me past the age of 10. It was as if I'd simply stopped existing. The strange thing was I'd never noticed before. Or maybe I had noticed and simply told myself it didn't mean anything. Jessica spotted me from across the room. She was talking animatedly to our mother about her third business venture, another boutique that would inevitably fail and inevitably be funded again. She waved at me without pausing her conversation. Brandon nodded from the corner where he was checking his phone. My father hugged me briefly and said it was good to see me. My mother smiled and said, "Oh, Amanda made it," in the same tone she might use to note that the caterer had arrived. And then I saw Uncle Mike. He was standing by the fireplace with his wife, Carol, holding a glass of red wine. When I walked in, his eyes met mine for just a fraction of a second before he looked away. He'd been doing that my whole life, I realized. Avoiding my gaze, finding somewhere else to look whenever I entered a room. I used to think he simply didn't like me. Now I knew the truth. Now I understood exactly why he couldn't look at me, but it was my mother's reaction that confirmed everything. I caught her watching Uncle Mike watching me. A flicker of fear crossed her face so fast that anyone else would have missed it. She was terrified. They both were. For 35 years, I thought I was just the unlucky one in this family. The daughter who didn't fit. The one nobody bothered to photograph. But watching my mother's eyes dart nervously between me and Uncle Mike, I finally understood. This was never about luck. It was never about me being difficult or distant. It was about a secret they'd been protecting my entire life. They just didn't know I'd already found it. Standing in that living room watching my mother and Uncle Mike exchange nervous glances, I found myself pulled back through time. The secret I now carried had roots that stretched back 17 years to a kitchen conversation that changed the entire course of my life. I was 18 years old, freshly accepted to a good university with a partial scholarship. I needed $15,000 a year to cover the rest. It was a lot of money, but my parents had paid the same amount for Brandon without a single question. When he'd gotten into college 2 years before me, my mother had written the check the same day. She'd thrown him a party. She'd cried happy tears and told everyone who would listen that her son was going places. I thought I'd done everything right. I came to the kitchen table with a spreadsheet showing exactly how I'd use the money. I brought a repayment plan offering to pay them back once I graduated and found a job. I'd even printed out a list of part-time jobs I'd already applied to, showing them I wasn't expecting a free ride. I just needed a little help. The same help they'd given my brother without him even having to ask. My mother barely glanced at the papers. She was making dinner, stirring something on the stove, and she didn't even turn around to face me when she spoke. "You'll figure it out, Amanda. You always do." I remember feeling the words like a physical blow. Figure it out. As if asking for help was somehow beneath me or beneath her to provide. I pressed harder. I pointed out that they'd paid for Brandon's entire education without hesitation. I asked why it was different for me. That was when she finally turned around. She looked at me with those cold eyes I knew so well, and she smiled. But there was no warmth in it. "Look at you," she said. "You don't even look like anyone in this family. Who knows if you're even mine?" My father was at the table. My grandmother was visiting. My Aunt Carol and Uncle Mike were there too, waiting for dinner. Everyone laughed. It was a joke. Of course it was a joke. What kind of mother would say something like that and mean it? But I watched her eyes as everyone laughed, and they weren't laughing. They were calculating, watching me, measuring my reaction, testing whether I knew something or suspected something. I laughed along because what else could I do? I was 18 years old. I needed them. I loved them even though they made it so hard to love them back. I told myself it was just a bad joke, that she didn't mean it, that families say stupid things sometimes. I took out student loans. I worked 2 jobs through college. I graduated with honors while barely sleeping for 4 years. I paid back every cent of those loans on my own years ahead of schedule. And I never asked my family for anything ever again. That was the day I stopped hoping they would treat me fairly. That was the day I started building a life that didn't depend on them. But standing in their living room 17 years later, I finally understood what I'd been too young to see back then. It wasn't a joke. It was never a joke. My mother knew the truth about who I was, and she'd been testing me my entire life to see if I'd figured it out. Once I recognized the pattern, I couldn't stop seeing it. The signs had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. I started going through my childhood memories with new eyes, and everything looked different. There were no baby photos of me. When I'd asked about it as a child, my mother said they were lost in a movie. But we'd never moved. I grew up in that same white house with the black shutters. Brandon had a baby book filled with pictures and first footprints and hospital bracelets. Jessica had the same. I had nothing. My birth certificate was always locked in a safety deposit box for safekeeping. I'd never actually seen it until I was 16 and needed it for my driver's license. My mother went to the bank alone to get it, and she handed it to me already inside an envelope. I never thought to question why. Every milestone in my siblings' lives was documented and celebrated. Brandon's first steps, Jessica's dance recitals, birthday parties with dozens of photos. But my achievements went unrecorded. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, my mother didn't come to the ceremony. She said she had a headache. When I got into college, there was no party, no tears, no proud announcements to relatives. Just that kitchen conversation and a joke that wasn't a joke. Every financial decision in our family had a logical reason to exclude me. Brandon needed a car for his commute. Jessica needed startup money for her business. I needed to learn independence. There was always an explanation that sounded reasonable if you didn't look too closely. But I was looking closely now, and I could see the truth. My mother hadn't been neglectful. She'd been systematic. She was creating distance between me and the family inch by inch, year by year, and I never understood why. Until 3 months ago. It started with a routine doctor's appointment. Nothing serious, just an annual checkup. The nurse handed me a form asking about family medical history. Heart disease, diabetes, cancer. I stared at the paper pen hovering and realized I didn't actually know. My father's side had some heart problems, I thought. Or was that my mother's side? I'd heard stories over the years. But suddenly I couldn't remember what was true and what I'd assumed. I checked unknown for most of the boxes and felt strangely unsettled. That night I ordered a DNA testing kit online. I wasn't looking for drama or secrets. I just wanted to know my health risks. The kit arrived a week later. I swabbed my cheek, mailed it back, and forgot about it for a month. The email came on a Tuesday evening. I was working late, finishing up a presentation for a client meeting. I opened the results expecting to see a list of genetic health markers. Instead, I saw something that made my heart stop. The test had matched me with biological relatives in their database. My father, Robert Cross, was not listed as a match, not even a partial match, but there was someone else. A close family match, the website said, possibly a father or uncle. The name attached to the match was Michael Cross, Uncle Mike. I sat in front of my computer for an hour, not moving, barely breathing. I remembered that Uncle Mike had done one of those ancestry tests last Christmas. Carol had given it to him as a gift. She'd wanted them to explore their heritage together, maybe find some distant relatives in Ireland. He'd done it to make her happy, posting the results on social media, with a joke about being disappointingly boring genetically. He had no idea that test would eventually match him with me. Everything made sense now. The way he'd avoided looking at me my entire life. The way my mother watched him whenever we were in the same room. The fear I'd seen in both their faces when I walked into the anniversary party. They'd been hiding this for 35 years. They thought they'd gotten away with it. I thought I finally understood everything. The affair, the guilt, the 35 years of being treated like a stranger in my own home. But sitting in that living room watching my mother smile for photos like nothing was wrong, I had no idea there was another secret waiting. One that would prove just how far she was willing to go to erase me. The secret I thought I understood was only the beginning. That evening, as the family gathered around the dining table for the anniversary dinner, I had no idea how much I still didn't know. My mother stood at the head of the table, tapping her wine glass with a fork to get everyone's attention. She was wearing her best dress, pearls around her neck, her hair freshly done. She looked every bit the picture of a devoted wife, about to celebrate 40 years of marriage. I watched her prepare to perform the same way she'd performed every day of my life. 40 years ago, she began, her voice warm and practiced. I married my best friend, Robert. You have been my rock, my partner, my everything. We built this family together, raised 3 beautiful children, and created a life I'm so proud of. She gestured around the table at Brandon and Jessica, then briefly at me, almost as an afterthought. Our children are our legacy. Brandon with his determination, Jessica with her entrepreneurial spirit, and Amanda who always had to do things her own way. There was a ripple of polite laughter. My mother smiled and continued. Family loyalty is everything. Through good times and bad, we stick together. That's what the Cross family does. That's what 40 years of marriage has taught me. She raised her glass and everyone followed. I lifted mine too, but I didn't drink. I was watching Uncle Mike across the table. His hand was steady, but his jaw was tight. He hadn't looked at me once since we'd sat down. My mother was careful not to look at him either. The performance continued, and I wondered how many dinners had been exactly like this one. How many toasts to family loyalty, while the biggest lie imaginable sat right there at the table. Dinner was served. Conversations started up around me. I answered questions when asked, smiled when appropriate, and waited. I still hadn't decided what I was going to do. Part of me wanted to get through this dinner and leave taking the truth with me. Part of me wanted them to know that I knew. I was still deciding when Brandon made up my mind for me. He was on his second glass of wine, relaxed and comfortable in the way of someone who has never had to struggle for anything. He looked at me across the table with that smirk I remembered from childhood and said, "So Amanda, how's life still paying off those student loans?" Jessica giggled beside him. "Brandon, be nice," she said, but she was laughing too. My mother shook her head with a fond smile. "Oh, leave her alone," she said. "She doesn't even look like any of us. Who knows if she's really mine?" The table erupted in familiar laughter. It was the old joke, the comfortable joke, the one I'd heard 100 times since I was 18 years old. But this time I didn't smile along. I watched Uncle Mike's hand tighten around his wine glass until his knuckles went white. I saw my mother's eyes flick toward him, a micro expression of warning passing between them. Stay calm, don't react, it's just a joke. Except it wasn't a joke. It had never been a joke. And I was done pretending. I set down my fork very calmly. The small sound it made against the plate seemed loud in the sudden quiet. "You know what, Mom," I said. "You're actually right." The laughter faded. My mother's smile faltered just slightly. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "It's just a joke, Amanda. Don't be so sensitive." I looked at her steadily. "I did a DNA test a few months ago. My doctor asked about family history of heart disease, and I realized I had no idea what my real medical history was. I didn't know if I should worry about Dad's heart problems or something else entirely." I paused, letting the words settle over the table. Turns out I was right to wonder. My father set down his glass. "Amanda, what are you talking about?" His voice was confused, not yet alarmed. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did except for the two people who had been hiding this for 35 years. "The test showed you're not my biological father, Dad." The words came out calm and clear. I'd imagined saying them 100 different ways over the past 3 months, but when the moment came, there was no anger in my voice. Just truth. My father's face went white. He stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. My mother jumped in immediately. "Those tests are often wrong, Amanda. Everyone knows they're not reliable. You can't just believe something you read on the internet." Her voice was sharp, defensive, already building a wall of denial. I continued as if she hadn't spoken. But there was another match in the system, a close family member. The test couldn't tell exactly what the relationship was. It said possibly a father, possibly an uncle. I turned my head slowly to look directly at Uncle Mike. He had gone completely still, his face the color of ash. "You did one of those ancestry kits last year, didn't you?" Uncle Mike. Carol mentioned it at Christmas. "She said you wanted to explore your heritage together." The wine glass slipped from Uncle Mike's fingers. It shattered against the hardwood floor, red wine spreading like blood across the polished wood. No one moved to clean it up. No one even looked at it. Every eye at the table was moving between me and Uncle Mike and my mother. My father turned to his brother. His voice was barely a whisper, cracked and broken. "How long?" Uncle Mike couldn't speak. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His hands were shaking. Aunt Carol sat beside him, frozen, her face a mask of dawning horror as she put the pieces together. My mother tried to take control. She stood up from her chair, hands raised, voice shifting into damage control mode. "This is all Mike's fault," she said quickly, pointing at her brother-in-law. "He took advantage of me. I was young, I was vulnerable, I didn't know what I was doing. He pursued me and I was too weak to stop it." My father cut her off. His voice was hollow, emptied of everything. 35 years, Linda. You've had 35 years to tell me. Every single day you woke up next to me and chose not to say anything. Every single day. My mother switched tactics instantly. The tears came right on cue. "I was scared, Robert. I was so scared. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to destroy our family. Everything I did to protect what we built together." I spoke quietly, but my voice cut through her performance. "You weren't scared of losing Dad. You were scared of losing control." She turned to me with fury in her eyes, the mask finally slipping. But before she could respond, Aunt Carol moved. She had been sitting frozen, processing everything, and now she stood up slowly. Her hands were trembling as she picked up her purse. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. 30 years of marriage to a man who had betrayed her in the worst possible way, and she had just found out at a dinner party. She walked to the front door with careful, measured steps and let herself out. The door closed softly behind her. Uncle Mike scrambled out of his chair, nearly tripping over the broken glass in his rush to follow her. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't apologize. He just ran the way he'd been running from the truth for 35 years. My father stood up slowly. He looked at my mother for a long moment, then at the shattered glass on the floor, then at me. Something passed across his face that I couldn't quite read. Grief, maybe, or recognition. He walked out without a word. A moment later, I heard his car start in the driveway. The engine faded into the distance until there was nothing left but silence. Brandon and Jessica sat paralyzed in their chairs, staring at our mother with wide eyes. They were waiting for her to fix this the way she'd always fixed everything. They were waiting for her to explain, to smooth it over, to make it all make sense. But for the first time in her life, Linda Cross had nothing to say. She stood at the head of her anniversary table surrounded by empty chairs and broken glass, and she had run out of lies. In the space of 5 minutes, 40 years of deception collapsed like a house of cards. My mother stood in the middle of her own anniversary party, surrounded by the wreckage of everything she'd built. For the first time in my life, I watched her face something she couldn't talk her way out of. But I didn't know yet that this was only the first secret. The second one was about to make everything worse. The second secret came 3 days later, and it proved that my mother's betrayal went far deeper than an affair. But first, the night had to end. After my father drove away and Uncle Mike chased after Aunt Carol, the dining room fell into a suffocating silence. My mother stood at the head of the table, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Brandon and Jessica stared at her with the helpless expressions of children, waiting for a parent to make everything better. They had no idea what to do when she couldn't. I didn't stay to watch. I pushed back my chair and gathered my purse, heading for the door without looking at anyone. My mother's voice stopped me before I reached it. "Where are you going? We need to talk about this as a family, Amanda. You can't just drop a bomb like that and walk away." I turned to face her. She was trying to regain control. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted to manage this situation the way she'd managed everything else for 35 years. "We were never a family," I said. "Not really, you made sure of that." I walked out before she could respond. The drive back to my hotel took 20 minutes. I don't remember most of it. My hands were steady on the wheel. My breathing was even, and my mind was strangely quiet. I had expected to feel triumphant or devastated or relieved. Instead, I felt nothing, just a vast emptiness where all the questions used to be. The truth was finally out. Everyone knew. The worst was over. Or so I thought. 3 days later, my phone rang. The name on the screen said Dad. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up some instinct that told me this call was different. His voice was hoarse when he spoke, like he'd been crying for days. Maybe he had. "Amanda," he said, "I need to tell you something. Can you meet me somewhere, please?" There was a desperation in his voice I'd never heard before. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near my hotel. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," he said before I even sat down. "I should have seen it. I should have protected you. All those years, I watched her treat you differently, and I told myself it was nothing. I was a coward." I sat across from him and waited. I could tell there was more. He took a shaky breath. 18 months ago, your mother convinced me to change my will." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "She said you'd abandoned us. She said you refused to help Brandon when he needed you, that you'd made it clear you didn't want to be part of this family anymore. She said it wasn't fair to leave anything to someone who had turned their back on us." He paused, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup like he needed something to hold on to. "I tried calling you Amanda, multiple times. I wanted to hear your side, but you never answered." I remembered. After my mother called me selfish for not lending Brandon $20,000, I'd stopped picking up calls from home. Every time I saw their number, I felt sick. I thought I was protecting myself from more accusations, more guilt trips, more reminders that I would never be good enough. I didn't know that my silence was being used as evidence against me. I didn't know that every unanswered call made my mother's story more believable. "I removed you from the will," my father said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. She laid us both." I sat with that information for a long moment. My mother hadn't just rejected me emotionally for 35 years. She had worked to erase me legally. She had taken my silence, my self-protection, my desperate attempt to preserve my own sanity, and she had twisted it into proof that I didn't deserve to be part of the family. It was calculated. It was methodical, and it had almost worked. "Dad," I said finally, "I need to tell you something too." He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm not struggling. I haven't been struggling for years. I'm the CEO of a financial consulting company. I have 50 employees. I bought my house with cash last year." He stared at me stunned. The information didn't compute with anything he'd been told about me. "I don't need the inheritance," I continued. "I never did. Keep me out of the will if you want. I don't need her money." I reached across the table and took his hand. It was trembling. "But I need you to know something. I never abandoned this family. I just stopped fighting for people who didn't want me." He broke down completely then. The tears he'd been holding back spilled over, and he gripped my hand like a drowning man. "All those calls," he said through his tears. "I wasn't calling to accuse you. I was calling because something felt wrong about what your mother was saying. It didn't match the daughter I remembered, but you never picked up, and I didn't know what to think." He wiped his eyes with his free hand. "I should have tried harder. I should have driven to your city, shown up at your door, demanded to talk to you face to face. But I was too much of a coward. I let her tell me what to believe because it was easier than fighting." Something shifted inside me as I listened to him. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. The wounds were too deep and too old for that. But it was understanding. We had both been manipulated. We had both made mistakes. The difference was that my father was finally willing to admit his. He was finally willing to see the truth, even though it destroyed everything he thought he knew about his marriage, his family, his life. That counted for something. We talked for 2 more hours. He told me about filing for divorce, about confronting my mother, about the excuses she kept making. He told me Uncle Mike hadn't come back to the house. Aunt Carol had thrown him out. I listened and nodded and held his hand when he needed it. By the time we left the coffee shop, something had changed between us. Not healed, but shifted. A door that had been closed for years was finally cracking open. The calls from my mother started that same evening. Then the texts. Then the emails. I read none of them. I knew what they would say. Explanations, justifications, attempts to rewrite history one more time. I wasn't interested. Brandon reached out next, his message dripping with confusion. "Can we talk? I need to understand what happened." I kept my response brief. "You had 30 years to understand. You chose not to look?" He didn't reply. Jessica tried a different approach, texting me that I was tearing this family apart. I didn't respond at all. I was done explaining myself to people who had never listened. My mother spent years pushing me away, building a case against me to everyone who would listen. She convinced my father I'd abandon them. She used my silence as proof of my guilt. But here's the thing about manipulation. It only works when the target doesn't know they're being played. I knew now. My father knew now. And her perfect story was about to cost her everything she'd tried to protect. Her perfect story did cost her everything. It just took 6 months for the full price to come due. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in March. My father took half of everything in the settlement, which was more than fair, considering he'd spent 40 years believing a lie. The first thing he did with his share was change his will. He called me that evening to tell me, "I'm leaving my portion to you," he said. I added a note. It says, "For my daughter in every way that matters." I cried when he told me. Not because of the money, because after 35 years, someone had finally put it in writing that I belonged. My mother was forced to sell the family house. The white siding, the black shutters, the rose bushes my father planted when I was 5. The home where she had controlled everyone for 40 years went to strangers at a closing she attended alone. She moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. No more dinner parties, no more anniversary celebrations, no more family gathered around her table hanging on her every word. Just 4 walls and silence. For the first time in her adult life, she had no one to manage, no one to manipulate, no one to perform for. I heard from my father that she called him constantly at first, trying to explain, trying to negotiate, trying to find some way back to the life she'd lost. He stopped answering after the first week. I ran into Uncle Mike 3 months after everything fell apart. It was at a grocery store near my office, the last place I expected to see him. I almost didn't recognize him. He had aged a decade in those months. His clothes hung loose on a thinner frame. His hair had gone gray at the temples. He looked smaller somehow, like the secret he'd been carrying for 35 years had been the only thing holding him up. He was pushing a cart with frozen dinners for one. Our eyes met across the aisle and he stopped. His mouth opened as if he wanted to say something. An apology maybe, an explanation. I turned and walked the other way. I didn't owe him a conversation. I didn't owe him anything. Later, my father told me what had happened to Uncle Mike. He'd shown up at his son's house for Thanksgiving, hoping to rebuild something with his children. His son didn't open the door. Uncle Mike stood outside for 20 minutes in the cold waiting, hoping before he finally gave up and walked back to his car. Aunt Carol had taken the house in their divorce. His children had chosen their mother. He lived alone now, in a rental apartment across town, estranged from everyone he once called family. I felt nothing when my father told me this. No satisfaction, no pity. Just the quiet recognition that actions have consequences, even when they take decades to arrive. Brandon and Jessica found out where I worked 4 months after the anniversary dinner. They showed up at my office without calling ahead, probably expecting to find me behind a reception desk or in a cubicle somewhere. Instead, they walked into a building with my name on the door. Cross Financial Consulting, 50 employees, a corner office on the top floor. They sat across from my desk, looking around at the certificates on my walls, the view from my window, the nameplate that said CEO. Brandon recovered first. "Amanda, we had no idea," he said. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I almost laughed. "You never asked." Jessica jumped in with her usual approach. "We're family, we should be supporting each other. I have this new business idea, and I was hoping maybe you could invest." I held up my hand to stop her. Brandon tried next. "I just need a loan to get back on my feet. Things have been hard since Mom's money dried up. Just enough to cover a few months of rent until I find something." I looked at both of them, these siblings I'd grown up with, these people who had watched me be erased from the family and never said a word. "When I needed $15,000 for college, you laughed at Mom's joke. When she called me selfish for not giving Brandon $20,000, I didn't have you believed her without question. You watched me get pushed out of this family for 30 years, and you never once asked if it was fair." I paused, letting the words settle. "You saw everything. You just didn't care, because you were benefiting. The answer is no." They left without another word. I haven't heard from either of them since. A letter arrived a week later with Uncle Mike's return address. I recognized his handwriting from birthday cards he used to sign, without ever looking at me. Just his name scrawled at the bottom, no personal message, no acknowledgement that I existed beyond an obligation. I held the envelope for a moment, feeling its weight. Then I dropped it directly in the trash without opening it. Some doors, once closed, don't need to be reopened. I already have a father, the one who chose me even when he didn't have to, even after he found out the truth. My father moved into a modest apartment near my neighborhood. I offered him my guest room, but he declined. He didn't want to be a burden, he said. But we established Sunday dinners, something we never had when I was growing up. I cook or we order in, and we sit at my kitchen table and talk about everything and nothing. Some Sundays are good. We laugh about old memories, the few good ones we can find. Some Sundays, he can barely get out of bed, crushed by the weight of what he didn't see for 35 years. Healing isn't linear, but every Sunday he shows up. That's enough for now. I donated $50,000 to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students last month. Not because it matched any inheritance, but because the number meant something to me. $15,000 for each year of college I couldn't afford plus interest. Some kid out there will get what I never did, I told my father. A chance to build something without starting in a hole. I heard through him that my mother found out about the donation. The daughter she'd refused $15,000 was now giving $50,000 to strangers. I hope the irony keeps her up at night. My life isn't a fairy tale. I still have nights when I can't sleep, replaying every sign I missed every time I hoped things would be different. I'm seeing a therapist now, not because I'm broken, but because I'm learning how to build something healthy. I'm dating someone who asks about my day and actually listens to the answer. I'm slowly building a family of my own choosing. Loyal friends, a partner who sees me, and my father who shows up every Sunday even when it's hard. It's not perfect, but it's mine. My mother spent 35 years treating me like I didn't belong. Turns out she was right, just not the way she meant it. I didn't belong in a family built on lies and silence and convenient blindness. I belonged somewhere else. Somewhere I had to build for myself. People ask me if I regret speaking up that night. If I wish I'd kept the secret, kept the peace, kept pretending. The answer is no. Some truths burn everything down when they come out. But some things need to burn. I spent 35 years trying to earn my place in a family that didn't want me. Now I'm building something better, not a perfect life. There's no such thing, just an honest one. Walking away wasn't giving up. It was choosing myself for the first time. And honestly, that's the most powerful thing I've ever done. Amanda's story teaches us something important that many of us need to hear. You cannot earn love from people who have already decided not to give it. Some families are built on truth and support. Others are built on secrets and control. Knowing the difference can save you years of heartache. If you recognize yourself in Amanda's story, if you have spent your life trying to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, Please know this: walking away is not failure. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop fighting for a place at a table where you were never truly welcome. Your peace matters more than their approval. Your future matters more than their narrative. Family is not just about blood. It is about who shows up, who listens, and who chooses you even when it is hard. Build your circle with people who see your value without you having to prove it every single day. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart or reminded you of your own experience, please subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story. Leave a comment below and tell us, have you ever had to choose yourself over a family that didn't choose you? We would love to hear from you.